he says Wyoming declined the federal dollars and continued to do things its own way.
They have a long history of that absence of partnership and therefore absence of accountability to the federal government.
John says that partnership ended up helping kids in many states, and Wyoming missed out. The interesting thing is John used to believe more in punishment than rehabilitation.
In my younger days, I guarantee you that I worked against what the research would say works now.
Before working at the DOJ, he worked as a juvenile probation agent in Virginia for close to 20 years.
My approach was, if I hold them accountable for the conditions that were imposed by the court, then they'll have some structure, some discipline, and some ability to overcome adversity. And that's what my job was.
But then, John says he realized he was just pushing kids deeper into the system and not helping them overcome the trauma and instability causing their delinquent behavior. He says programs that give kids positive interactions and experiences and focus on helping them feel safe and supported make the biggest difference. But John learned that lesson the hard way.
I think I had a role in the ultimate demise of 3 kids that I worked with, and it was their own self-demise by suicide.
And that heartbreaking realization didn't come right away.
To argue that I had an epiphany with their passing, that I needed to look at a different approach, that would be too Hollywood. I didn't feel that way at the time.
He says he was able to overlook those deaths because there was no oversight. He was holding kids accountable for their actions, but no one was holding him accountable. He says that's what's happening in Wyoming.
I mean, they get to tell an anecdotal story that might signify success, but if they don't have results or data, are not forced to confront the fact that what they're doing is unsuccessful or works against what the research says. And who pays? Well, the kids pay.
Kids like Larissa. And that's what Jennifer didn't want to talk about in front of her husband, Andrew, when she arranged to meet with me at the park. Jennifer says when Larissa came back from her second trip to the girls' school and was put on probation, she hit an all-time low.
It's almost like she was like going into a depression, and I reached out to probation. And her probation officer wasn't there, but I talked to the supervisor. And I said, look, I don't know how to help her. I said, she's not doing, like, she's not bad in the home. Like, she was very respectable. Like, she was doing what she needs to do. I said, but I see there's something going on with her emotionally.
Jennifer says she wanted probation to ease off to let Larissa adjust to school. She wanted probation to call and tell Larissa she was doing a good job.
And she says, well, your probation officer's not in right now. I can leave a message. We can try to call her, maybe schedule a meeting. And I said, well, I kind of need this to happen, like, ASAP. The feeling is not right to me. I said, I mean, we need to, like, do something for her, you know? And she says, okay, we'll figure it out. I'll give you a call back.
Jennifer says she made that call on Tuesday. 2 days later, Andrew found Larissa dead in her room. She'd taken her own life.
Even to the last week of her life, you know, I called and I tried to get help for her.
Jennifer says Larissa was failed. Is it fair to lay Larissa's death entirely at the feet of Wyoming's juvenile justice system? Probably not. Sadly, there were too many traumatic things in Larissa's life to isolate just one cause of her suicide. She'd had her ups and downs mentally from the time she was a little kid, but from Jennifer's perspective, the juvenile justice system made things worse.
Would she have benefited more from not being institutionalized?
Oh,
but
Jesus.
having more interaction, like, here locally, to where she could get help that she needed and, you know, like, still be here with us.
I went to meet with the 2 juvenile probation agents who worked Larissa's case, Diana Melton and Crystal Britt. Hey. I wanted to know if Larissa's suicide made them rethink their work.
Not make me rethink anything, but it is just, you feel for that family.
It's just block the intersection. Very good.
Crystal says while she doesn't 100% agree with everything about the juvenile justice system, she thinks they do more good than harm.
I think there is a lot of pressure, but life has a lot of pressure. And you have to learn that. Adults don't always handle the pressure all that well either. She was a good kid, and it was terrible what happened. But a lot of parents say, well, you're putting a lot of stress on my kid. You're putting a lot of stress on my kid and my family. I don't really know how else to say it, and I don't want to sound rude, but we didn't put you here.
Really, right in front of traffic.
And once kids end up on probation, there are limited options Diana and Crystal can offer them, no matter how much they may want to help. Judge Gary Hartman says Wyoming's use of probation and incarceration has more to do with the system's own momentum than what's actually good for kids.
There has been a tradition to say, you're going to be in court, you're going to have to answer for this. And I think that's a hard thing to break. It's difficult to turn the ship.
When Hartman was a juvenile court judge, he tried to steer his district in a new direction. He looped in social workers and educators who knew the kids who ended up in his courtroom. And as a team, they made decisions about what would help the most. That approach became state law, and now all juvenile court judges have to take recommendations from a community team. But people who serve on those teams say they end up sending kids away to places like the girls' school because resources aren't available locally. Right now, Hartman says there's no incentive to change that.
The state is the one that actually pays the bill when these kids go into placement.
In other words, it's cheaper for counties to send troubled kids away because it's the state that covers the cost.
So instead of working in the community to try to solve the problem, I think prosecutors and judges too will send the kid out to say, out of sight, out of mind, we're not going to worry about them for 6 or 8 months. We'll worry about them when they come back.
And for counties that want to build programs to keep kids out of the justice system and in their own communities, they mostly pay for that on their own because the state sets aside very little money for that. But even if the state gave money to counties for local programs,
That doesn't mean that it's going to solve the problem of keeping the kids in the community.
that's because the state provides very little oversight. Right now, counties aren't forced to measure whether
Hey,
they're
sweet
actually
ride.
helping kids. I wanted to find out if the state was willing to put that kind of pressure on counties. So I called up Governor Mark Gordon. Hey, it's Tennessee calling. He's a Republican who's been in office for 2 years. What role should the state play in reducing juvenile incarceration rates?
Well, Tennessee, obviously it's an evolving
Really?
issue, and so
Fully
I
read.
think that conversation at a statewide level is very valuable. But the issue in Wyoming for a long time has been dealt with on a local level, and we are a local controlled state.
It's 2 red light runners I've caught in a row.
Maybe sort of the tradition there.
But that tradition has costs. Costs for young people who end up incarcerated at higher rates, costs for their long-term well-being, because the state's model doesn't require counties to prove their approach is working. And it's costing the state a lot of money. I looked at what Wyoming has spent on juvenile justice for the last 10 years. And Sweetwater County, where Larissa was from, cost the state more than any other county. And it's mostly for sending kids to juvenile facilities. Sweetwater spends more than even the most populated county, home to the state capital, Cheyenne. This is at a time when Wyoming needs to save money. The state gets most of its revenue from taxes on coal, oil, and gas. But with those industries in decline, the state budget has been shrinking, and that's only gotten worse with the pandemic. Given the financial situation we're in, why not put some pressure on the counties to try and figure out a more affordable, more effective way to deal with troubled kids?
In terms of the term pressure, my sense is it's much better as a conversation, because then we're all going to arrive at a much better solution. And I think the point you're making about community-based approach coaches, those are all the better. But we have had a massive change in our revenue picture, huge reductions, and I think everybody's just trying to get through to the next day before we have a chance to really sit down and say, okay, now let's reallocate our resources.
State revenue has gone down so much that Governor Gordon is calling for across-the-board budget cuts. That includes eliminating the small amount the state does
Yeah,
give
they
for
got the bikes
community-based
may use full lane
programs,
signs up.
even though the research says they're more effective than incarceration. In the meantime, prosecutors and judges are not being asked to send fewer kids away.
If Wyoming wanted to figure out how to help kids who get in trouble and at the same time save money, it wouldn't have to look far to get ideas. Next up, we go to South Dakota. That state had high juvenile incarceration rates like Wyoming, but in the last 5 years, decided to try something different. You're listening to Reveal.
Reveal is brought to you by Progressive Insurance with the Name Your Price tool, offering a range of coverage and price options to choose from. Now that's Progressive. More at progressive.com or 1-800-PROGRESSIVE.
I'm Michelle Martin. Here at All Things Considered, we keep you up to date on the news.
Imagine how busy this would be if this was a normal
We're
year.
here to help you understand what's really going on, the stories behind the sound bites. In a time when misinformation and even disinformation is everywhere, want to take some time with us this week